But every time we accept or tolerate one more red line being crossed, we normalize the next. Each violation, larger than the last, makes what came before feel almost normal. America's democracy has withstood civil war, depressions, attacks by foreign enemies on its soil, but it has never faced an assault on this scale. An internal demolition carried out not by outsiders or even by well-armed rebels, but by the holder of the highest office in the land.
You just watched a snippet from Ali Velshi's recent monologue on MSNBC about how our worst fears about the fall of democracy have already come to fruition, and it's an important wake-up call for a lot of people who are still talking about democracy in the present tense, who refer to Trump's authoritarianism as if it's theoretical. But democracy isn't dying. It's already dead. Trump isn't a wannabe dictator. He's just a dictator at this point, period. And Velshi's commentary here really helps people make that much-needed conceptual shift. And to be clear, everything that he's saying is validated by political scientists, 500 of which say that America is quickly sliding into a form of competitive authoritarianism like Hungary and Turkey. Others, like Stephen Levitsky, have concluded that we're already there since America no longer meets the basic criteria to be characterized as a liberal democracy. But without further ado, here's the important reality check from Ali Velshi that I think every American needs to hear.
The collapse of democracy is a strange, almost surreal thing. It can be abstract and hard to recognize in the moment. At first, it just feels like politics. It's messy, it's noisy, it's frustrating, and sometimes a bit removed from one's day-to-day life. But then the guardrails that we've taken for granted begin to topple, one after another. A National Guard unit deployed to a city that never asked for it. Key parts of the nation's electoral process attacked as illegitimate. Rulings of federal judges shrugged off as optional. Neighbors disappeared into ICE vans. Critics and political opponents suddenly faced with criminal probes. The media behaving in ways designed not to trigger the ire of the ruling party. Each new abuse is justified as temporary, necessary, even an emergency. Until one day, it's not temporary at all. Until one day the justifications stop altogether, because once power is absolute, it no longer feels the need to explain itself. At best, each assault may seem like an outlier until the day you wake up and realize the system itself has become unrecognizable. Well, that's where we are right now. It's not where we're headed, it's where we are. The tragedy of what's unfolding and the danger of what's ahead will be compounded if American citizens en masse, all of us, do not recognize this moment for what it is. Understandably, unless it touches you directly, it's easy to say sometimes to miss what's being taken away. We've been telling ourselves the courts will stop it. Congress will step in. Surely someone will draw the line. Yet one by one, those lines have already been crossed. Just look around. Last night, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker had to publicly rebuke President Trump's reported plan to send military troops into Illinois.
And there's more from that segment, which we'll get back to, but I want to pause right there to add further context to what he's saying, because what he's describing is something that we're seeing in real time. As you all know, Trump sent troops to L.A., and then we got over that after the initial shock. He then federalized DC's police force and sent troops there, and we're all just going on with our daily lives. He floated the idea of declaring a national emergency to subvert Congress to keep the troops in DC longer than 30 days, or more specifically, to keep the police force in DC federalized longer than 30 days. And he's currently planning a military takeover of Chicago and is threatening to do the same in Baltimore. And at this point, it's just becoming a normal thing. And he even acknowledged that militarily occupying cities run by his political opponents is dictatorship. But listen to what he said in response to that criticism.
As you all know, Chicago's a killing field right now. And they don't acknowledge it. And they say, we don't need him. Freedom, freedom. He's a dictator. He's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator. I don't like a dictator. I'm not a dictator. I'm a man with great common sense, and I'm a smart person.
Yeah, totally not a dictator, and very smart. But maybe we need a dictatorship. That's crazy. But it's not just what he's doing, it's the threats to anyone that challenges his power. For those who don't know, there's been widespread 24/7 protests in Los Angeles for weeks now that's been suppressed by mainstream media. And in order to avoid suppression in social media algorithms, TikTokers have been referring to the protests as the LA Music Festival of 2025, where they share footage of protesters defying curfews and protesting militarized police officers. And media outlets are probably reluctant to show this kind of footage because they know that there could be harsh penalties for making dear leader look weak. So they capitulate in order to avoid lawsuits or settlements that could hurt their bottom line. And experts on media policy aren't just horrified by the onslaught of lawsuits Trump has filed to silence the press, but they're especially alarmed by the press's willingness to capitulate to the regime. So as Trump consolidates more and more power, he's simultaneously trying to intimidate his critics into silence. With the media, he threatens lawsuits, but when it comes to people in general in the streets resisting his regime, he's threatening violations of their civil liberties. Police abuses, imprisonment with no due process or habeas corpus, and restricting their First Amendment rights. In fact, he just signed an executive order overriding a 1989 Supreme Court decision that protects flag desecration as free speech. And during the press conference where he signed this unconstitutional executive order, he admitted that he was overriding Supreme Court precedent, but of course, as you're going to see, that didn't stop him from doing it.
All over the country, they're burning flags. All over the world, they burn the American flag. And as you know, through a very sad court, I guess it was a 5-4 decision, they called it freedom of speech. But there's another reason, which is perhaps much more important. It's called death. Because what happens when you burn a flag is the area goes crazy. If you have hundreds of people, they go crazy. You could do other things. You can burn this piece of paper. But when you burn the American flag, it incites riots at levels that we've never seen before. People go crazy. In a way, both ways. There are some that are going crazy for doing it. There are others that are angry about them doing it. Do you want to discuss that?
Sure. So what the executive order does, sir, it charges your Department of Justice with investigating instances of flag burning, and then where there's evidence of criminal activity, where prosecution wouldn't fall afoul of the First Amendment, and instructs the Department of Justice to prosecute those who are engaged in these instances of flag burning.
And what the penalty is going to be, if you burn a flag, you get 1 year in jail. No early exits, no nothing. You get 1 year in jail. If you burn a flag, you get, and what it does is incite to riot. I hope they used that language, by the way. Did they?
Yeah, incitement.
Incite to riot. And you burn a flag, you get 1 year in jail. You don't get 10 years, you don't get 1 month. You get 1 year in jail, and it goes on your record. And you will see flag burning stopping immediately, just like when I signed the Statute and Monument Act.
Now, typically, I tell you that the 5-4 decision that he's referring to from 1989, Texas v. Johnson, is binding precedent, and he can't just undo that with a stroke of a pen. But I mean, he kind of can, right? The Constitution is no longer in effect, and the law is what he says it is, essentially. And the Supreme Court helped to facilitate this new reality. They gave him a loophole to override the Constitution by getting rid of nationwide injunctions. And the courts were the only ones stopping him from abusing power, and he has since taken advantage of that new power that the Supreme Court created for him. He's currently trying to undo birthright citizenship, which is codified in the 14th Amendment, because, I mean, why wouldn't he? Nobody's there to stop him. The Supreme Court said that judges can't block him from breaking the law, and they also gave him near absolute immunity, so everything is on the table now. If he wants to defy the Constitution and punish people who burn the flag with a year in prison, there's nobody stopping him from doing that. They could say you can't do that because it's illegal, but who's going to actually stop him? Not Congress, not the Supreme Court. Lower courts can't now. Certainly not the police or the troops who are complying with his unlawful orders as we speak in D.C. and L.A. And the rationale that free speech is tantamount to incitement that he's using there, that is going to extend to other forms of protected speech too. Flag desecration obviously is just the beginning. It always starts this way with one small thing, and then when you give him an inch, he takes a mile. Again, the law is effectively what Trump says it is. He is a de facto dictator at this point who is ruling by decree. Like, executive orders are not supposed to be sweeping. They're not supposed to be a law. But I mean, he's using it that way because, again, nobody can fucking stop him. and he's hunting down any and everyone who threatens his absolute power. A former Trump insider purports to have evidence that Trump is currently planning federal raids on journalists. So that's going to be great for democracy. And after raiding John Bolton's home, who's now a Trump critic, he's threatening to investigate Chris Christie for criticizing him when he was on ABC. And when a journalist asked him whether or not these kinds of raids of political opponents will become more common, he dodged the question. So the answer is basically a yes.
Are more raids like that coming, sir? Are more raids like the one on John Bolton's house coming?
More raids? I don't know. You'd have to ask the Department of Justice. They raided my house, I can tell you that. They did a big raid on my house. They took away everything that wasn't pinned down, and they took away some of that too. No, they raided Mar-a-Lago. They started that.
Now, this goes without saying, but obviously I'm no fan of John Bolton or Chris Christie, and probably won't be a fan of whoever else he plans to target. But obviously, weaponizing the Justice Department to go after political opponents has a chilling effect on free speech, and that is exactly why they're doing it. If you criticize Donald Trump, well, he might investigate you and sue the network that you're on, which gives them an incentive to stop people from criticizing him in the first place. And making an example out of his most vocal critics is an easy way to scare everybody else into compliance. But they're not his only targets, because the regime again arrested Kilmar Abrigo Garcia after he was returned home from the concentration camp that he was sent to in El Salvador. And there are talks that he'll be sent to Uganda now, which is a country that he has no connection to. And at this point, I feel like this guy has a legitimate reason to apply for asylum in Canada for the fact that the regime is hellbent on turning him into a political prisoner. But Canada would likely deny that case because their cuck Prime Minister Mark Carney, like other world leaders, has also bent the knee to Donald Trump. So in the event Trump demanded Kilmar Abrigo Garcia's extradition if they granted him asylum, Carney would likely comply with that request. But the reason why they're going after Kilmar Abrigo Garcia so hard is because he fell through the cracks. They thought that they could keep him in El Salvador, and they want to make sure that everything that they do is permanent and irreversible. So by making an example out of him, it shows you're never going to escape the clutches of this administration's power, right? And it's not just one individual here that we're talking about, obviously. We're talking about entire classes of people, immigrants, and also trans people, namely trans kids. And I say that because the DOJ is currently trying to get a Philadelphia hospital to hand over sensitive information about trans children, such as their names and social security numbers, which is an ominous sign that political prosecution for their parents may be imminent, although we don't know. But all of the things that Trump is doing are intended to send a message and create fear and uncertainty, so everyone in society who opposes him feels inclined to just acquiesce so as to avoid his wrath. This is what dictators do. This is how they consolidate power. Getting all of society to bend to your will is how you grow and maintain power, and that's exactly what Trump is doing right now. And Ali Velshi explains this in the next portion of his monologue.
This is not about public safety. It's about flexing power, teaching dissenters and political opponents a lesson, normalizing the use of troops against Americans. In the nation's capital, hundreds of federal troops now patrol the streets alongside ICE and DEA and FBI agents, ticketing residents for minor offenses like broken taillights. Federal troops policing petty crime on America's main street. Think about that. Crime may be statistically down, but intimidation is way up. The police state is here. And that's the whole point. D.C. restaurants and bars report business down by 1/3. What Trump is doing is designed to bleed blue cities dry economically. Meanwhile, red state governors are planning on sending hundreds more guard troops into the Capitol. Soldiers who, by the way, have no training in urban policing. Donald Trump is threatening to eliminate mail-in ballots and voting machines, the very infrastructure of elections, proudly parroting a line that Trump said Putin used with him that, quote, "You can't have an honest election with mail-in voting," end quote. Can you imagine quoting Vladimir Putin about free and fair elections? This, by the way, all as Homeland Security announces plans to hold election security funds hostage unless states accept Trump's new rules. Secret voter databases, citizenship checks on poll workers, and untested systems that most states can't implement in time. What Republicans label election security is the classic playbook of the strongman. Tilt the playing field toward yourself and lock yourself into power. Doesn't stop in Washington, D.C. Across the country, Republican-controlled legislatures are dismantling the last avenues of direct democracy, citizen ballot initiatives. In Missouri, voters raised the minimum wage. Lawmakers gutted it. In Arkansas and Florida, new laws make it harder for grassroots petitions even to reach the ballot. Across the country, roughly 40 bills to restrict civilian initiatives have passed at least one legislative chamber this year, according to a review by the Associated Press. Most of these measures, the AP notes, are coming from Republican lawmakers in states where citizen petitions have been used to put abortion rights, marijuana legalization, or other progressive initiatives on the ballot. The message is clear. Even if voters pass something that Republicans don't like, Republicans in power will just rewrite the rules. This is not democracy. That is something called competitive authoritarianism. Elections in name, one-party rule in practice.
That is exactly what this is, competitive authoritarianism. And if you don't know what that is, competitive authoritarianism, as defined by political scientist Stephen Levitsky in a 2002 issue of the Journal of Democracy, is a system where formal democratic institutions are widely viewed as the principal means of obtaining and exercising political authority, but incumbents violate those rules so often and to such an extent, however, that the regime fails to meet conventional minimum standards for democracy. And he emphasizes in this journal article that I'll link to down below that this is different than regimes with flawed democracies with ineffective governments, which we had before. Competitive authoritarianism refers specifically to power and how incumbents cling to power by twisting the rules to keep them in power. This is exactly what Republicans are doing now, and it's what happened to Hungary, Turkey, and Russia. It's how they went from democracy to competitive authoritarian regimes. You rewrite the rules to maintain power forever. Trump inadvertently admitted that he knows people think that he's a dictator, and the party as a whole isn't oblivious to the unpopularity of the things that they're doing, like the big bullshit bill, which is why they're currently using the power that they have to rewrite the rules to permanently keep themselves in power. So no matter how unpopular they become, they won't have to worry about losing elections. It's a systematic attack on our elections. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And this is how it always happens. If you look at dictatorships around the world, it's not like they just killed democracy in one fell swoop and they were like, okay, guys, we're going to be a dictatorship now. That's never how it happens. It's always a slow but steady decline. And that's exactly what Trump and the Republican Party is doing right now in front of our eyes. And it might be difficult to grapple with that reality because we've always known flawed democracy, but that is no longer the case. We are in a competitive authoritarian regime, and that is what Trump is making permanent currently. The Brennan Center for Justice warns about the plethora of unprecedented ways that Trump is interfering with our elections to make sure he never has to worry about leaving office or Republicans losing elections. They're attempting to rewrite election rules to burden voters and usurp control of election systems. They're targeting or threatening to target election officials and others who keep elections free and fair. They're supporting people who undermine election administrations and retreating from the federal government's role of protecting voters and the election process. And on top of that, the Supreme Court is likely going to give the Voting Rights Act its final death blow. Now, the article goes through concrete examples to prove how Trump and the Republican Party are doing this, but we all know the most famous one is Trump's pressure on Texas and other red states to gerrymander. And in Texas in particular, he said he wants 5 more seats. And after Texas approved their new maps, Trump touted it as a big win on Truth Social, saying that they're on their way to getting 5 more seats. But as you all know, Gavin Newsom came up with a response to even the playing field by gerrymandering California to give Democrats an additional 5 seats. But Trump responded to that by threatening to sue him, because it's okay for Republicans to explicitly gerrymander for partisan purposes, but not Democrats, because the goal is to keep Democrats out of power forever. And it's not like this is necessarily a new phenomenon for Republicans, because they've been doing this for a while now with voter ID laws and whatnot. Like, they saw demographic changes in the electorate as a threat to their electoral viability, so they started to rewrite the rules with voter ID and these purges of counties, and by restricting the number of voting stations in particular precincts if they don't favor Republicans. But now they're just like, fuck it. We should just go all gas, no brakes, because the cat's out of the bag. Trump's an authoritarian. We agree with him that we should just have power forever. And they are facilitating that reality where they basically fucking have power forever, regardless of how brazen they look. But it's important to understand that all of these changes, they simply cannot be undone when Trump is gone, because the Republican Party as an institution is now explicitly authoritarian. They went from being implicitly authoritarian to being explicitly authoritarian. They do not care about democracy. They are openly hostile towards democracy. And they're not going to suddenly democratize once Trump is out of power. Hence why so many political scientists are referring to our new regime as closed authoritarianism, because the party in power is literally rigging elections to ensure that elections can only result in one outcome, them in power. Doesn't matter who, just a Republican. So they're making sure elections are no longer free and fair. And even if they don't do enough to stop Democrats from winning elections organically and they need to rig it more, a Democrat can't simply undo all of the damage that Trump is causing if, they win an election, like in 2028, for example, unless they exert authoritarian control greater than what we're seeing from Donald Trump now. And we all know that no Democrat has the spine to do that, even if it's necessary. And of course, that obviously isn't going to lead to the restoration of democracy. It's just going to be, a different party wielding authoritarian power. And if the real goal is to return power to the people, then you can't just operate in the same system just with different authoritarians every 4 to 8 years. That's not how democracy works. So when you take into account what Ali Velshi said in his really important monologue, along with the evidence that I presented you with in this video and the other videos that I've done about this, I think the obvious conclusion is that we are now up shit creek without a paddle. But I'm not trying to get you to go full doomer mode. I think that it's important that we be realistic about what we're dealing with, because if we're still in denial about what our system has become, we're never going to be able to change it. I mean, you can't come up with a cure for a disease until you've diagnosed it. You've got to know what to treat. So if you expect things to just return to normal with another election or two, unfortunately, that ship has sailed. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because most of my viewers already know this, but I think that other Americans who aren't as tuned in, they're the ones who have to understand that this is the new reality. By electing Donald Trump, that has transformed us into an authoritarian country, and you cannot just undo that with another election. We lack the power now to change things through elections.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.